Hey guys, this is James from TDB bringing you another Inbetweenisode. Today is going to be kind of an odd Inbetweenisode. I won't be drinking, but I will be drinking a unrelated tea to this. This is the 2001 Simplified Young 7542 from a previous episode, or maybe I've aired these in a different order, I'm not sure. But I'm going to be talking about why a cake of tea is a really weird amount of tea and a very awkward amount of tea. Kind of depending on what you want to do. It's kind of become the norm sort of by default, just because pu'er tends to be pressed into cakes or bricks and things like that. And, people have played around a lot with the size of them, but I think regardless of if a cake is 200 grams, as has become popular with a lot of kind of boutique vendors, Western and even Eastern vendors included, or kind of your standard size, 357 grams, or your kind of jumbo 500 gram Yongqing Hao cakes. A lot of people have kind of messed around with it. I think it's almost all the time just kind of a weird amount of tea to buy. First of all, one thing you'll run into if you're in the pu'er world for long enough is kind of this fun saying that kink is a sample. And I sort of get it in the sense that, the reason behind it is that, you buy a sample and it can vary a lot. Depending on if it comes from the bing hole. If you get like a sample that's just the bing hole, people will complain about it. I've complained about it before. Or if you get something on the outer rim, maybe it's different from the stuff kind of closer to the core of the tea. So one way around that is just to buy the whole cake as sort of like a sample. It gives you a lot to drink through. But you know what? It's really a lot more than a sample. When you're buying a 357 gram cake, you're really getting something like 50 to 70 sessions if you use 5 grams to 7 grams of leaf, depending on what that is. And that's a lot of sessions. And you do learn more by drinking a tea. But you're definitely going to learn more in attempts 1 through 5 drinking a tea than times attempts 61 to 65. And so, if you really are trying to learn a lot, there is something valuable to be said for drinking one tea over and over and over again. But I do think you're probably going to, there's diminishing returns that you're going to get there in terms of drinking the tea. I do think in this sense, 200 grams is probably quite a bit better than 357 grams. But even still, in a 200 gram cake, you are getting something like 30 to 50 sessions or 30 to 40 sessions of tea for just that one cake. And that's just a lot. That's a lot. Personally, for me, there's quite a few teas that I do not want to have 30 to 40 times. So I think in that sense, maybe it's better to buy 2 samples or 3 samples than to end up with a cake. Because this brings me to a couple other points, is it's kind of really easy to accumulate owning cakes. I personally don't really like owning one cake, and what has happened over the years is, I've been drinking tea for a long time. It takes a long time to finish a cake, unless you really make kind of a committed effort, or you're very early in your drinking and you're only rotating between a couple teas. I think I might be a little bit of an outlier here, but I think you could count on 2 hands, so on 10 or under the amount of raw pu'er cakes that I've actually finished. And I've been drinking pu'er pretty regularly for probably, 10 or 11 years at this point. So, it's just it's hard to finish them. So it ends up being, as kind of a result, really, really easy to accumulate cakes. So depending on how you look at that, you're kind of accumulating samples, which is not great. It kind of clogs up your tea space. It makes it messier. When you start to dig into a cake, it's going to get kind of inherently messy. It's going to get dust everywhere, things like that. So it's just weird to age one cake too, partly because of kind of the messy factor, and it's also just not a lot of tea if you are intending on kind of aging this in sort of the long term. So one way people will get around this is they'll buy 2 cakes, one to kind of drink, one to age long. This is okay. You kind of still end up with a lot of the same problems here, just because you have one cake that might be a bit beaten and tattered and stuff like that. At least you have one other to go to. But as far as the long term, a cake is not a lot. So you end up with kind of this amount where it's a lot more than a sample, in my opinion. but it's a lot less than like kind of a lifetime supply of tea. And that's where you sort of end up in like interesting philosophies like what Marshall has talked about, like hitting hard with a hammer, where you just buy a ton of it. I have always gone back and forth on this. On one hand, it seems very nice. On the other hand, it seems like a very easy way to accumulate a whole lot of tea very fast. If instead of buying, if there's cakes that you like, you're just going out and you're buying 2 or 3 tongs of it straight up. That's just a lot of tea to have. So I hope that your spouse approval does not take a hit or anything like that. So there's only a very limited amount of teas that you can really do that for, unless you're living in a space with a whole lot of space and you're very, very confident in your storage. So yeah, that's that's kind of just what I wanted to riff about. Perhaps the cake as a sample is worse there, in the sense that maybe people should just kind of buy more samples of the tea rather than buying the full cake, or finding ways to split it. I mean, splitting cakes, I think, is a very good practice and a way to actually effectively be able to kind of polish on and finish off this cake. Because, I can sort of attest that, like, having, like, 25 or 30 or 40, like, open cakes that you've had between, like, 5 grams to 50 grams of each is, it's just inherently kind of a messy endeavor, and it's not one that I would necessarily wish upon people or I find feels particularly great. So yeah, those are kind of the main points. It's weird to age one cake. It's really easy to accumulate a lot of cakes. And cake as a sample, maybe just buy more samples. Okay, well, let me know how you like these kind of like very random rant on kind of the default amount of pu'er that a lot of people end up buying. For me, at least, I do find a cake is not an awkward amount when it comes to ripe, because I will just constantly have between 5 and 10 ripe cakes around, and I'll just sort of buy and rotate, and I have no issue at all finishing those. I've probably finished 60, 70 ripe cakes in my 10 years of drinking, so not a problem at all when it comes to ripe. So obviously, it does depend. And the problem can really compound upon itself when you have so many different choices for raw and yeah. So anyways, rant over. Thank you all for tuning in. Let me know how you like this episode. I will see y'all next time. Cheers.